What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Seth's Project. My name is Seth, of course. Today we're actually in the new shop. You guys haven't seen it yet unless you follow me on Instagram. I thought about doing a shop tour first, but things aren't really situated right now. They're kind of scattered throughout the shop, and I'll just wait till I have everything ready to go. But I really wanted to put out a video in the new shop. So today we're going to actually be making the Asanoha pattern. We're making Kumiko with this piece of construction grade lumber, and this is definitely possible with this construction grade lumber. You just want to make sure that you don't use any pieces with the knots, and preferably you want to find the place where there's the straightest grain, which would be right here on the side, and you will have a pretty good result. So first things first, we're going to go over all the stuff that you need to get started. So let's jump down here to the bench and I'll show you guys that. I want to apologize for the crappy audio right now. I'm going to get that figured out hopefully a little bit later on in this video. I've got to get my microphone, but I have my dehumidifier right here to the right, and that's the weird background noise that you hear. And unfortunately I have to keep that on. So anyway, you're going to need a rule. I usually use millimeters, so this is a ruler in millimeters. This I consider an essential tool in the workshop. If you do not have one of these, get one. I don't care if you're a hand tool or a power tool woodworker, get one of these. It's a digital caliper, so you need digital calipers. You're going to need a marking knife. You're going to need a hand plane. I use a Japanese one, and you can also use, one second, you can also use a wide chisel like this, which I don't do that just because I find it way easier just to use the Japanese hand plane. So let's talk about these jigs just a little bit. So I spaced this middle portion in here to fit 4 pieces of Kumiko, so that way I can cut the angles into 4 pieces of Kumiko at once, and this is how I cut. So I'll do this across the front here. That's why I like using the hand plane over a chisel. I find it's more accurate and it's faster, so I don't do that. But yeah, so I'll put 4 pieces of Kumiko in here so I can cut them all at once. That means I can cut the vertical pieces all at once, and I don't have to do it twice or 4 times. So let's go over the angles here. So this angle right here is a 67.5 degree angle. You can cut that however you want. You can do it with hand tools. You can do it on a miter saw, which that's what I've done here. It's kind of difficult on a miter saw, but it works. Right here is a 22.5. I believe, no, this one's the 22.5. This is a 45. So 45, 67.5, and 22.5 right here. So those are the angles that you need. It doesn't really matter how you get those angles on here, just as long as you have them. And I also use a cutoff piece of this one, this middle piece, and I screw these together so that way I can keep one of these. I don't have it glued together. And this just slides right in there perfect. And I use that as a backstop, and I'll take a clamp and I'll clamp it to the bench, and that way I can set exact depths here. So if I need to take a little tiny shaving, I'll tap it to the back with a hammer and take that last shaving and get that really precise. So I think this is a really good, simple method for these jigs. And I might go in a little bit more detail later on in this video, or maybe in a different video on these, because these are kind of the most important thing to making the Asanoha pattern is these jigs right here. This is the next jig that I use. I don't know how well you guys can see this when you move things around. This is a really simple jig, so I just used a 2x6, and I screwed a stop here to the front, and I got a Kumiko piece here and a small Kumiko piece here. And the general rule of thumb here is if you're using let's see, 14 mil thickness for the Kumiko. Let me get a Kumiko piece and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So this is one of the first ones that I did like a month ago, I think. And so the thickness would be, this is what I'm talking about in the thickness right here. And for these pieces that guide it here, you want them to be, if this is 14 millimeters in thickness, you want this to be about 6.5 millimeters. So that way, whenever you cut down, you know to stop at 6.5, and then we'll go over that later. But just for the sizing here, you want it to be about 6.5 millimeters thick. Screw it onto the back of here for your backstop, and when you put the pieces in here, you'll screw this piece to hold it all in place, and then we'll mark our joinery and we'll cut it with the handsaw. And this is a pretty essential jig right here as well. So the whole Asanoha pattern, these are the 3 jigs that you need. And obviously we're going to need the lumber of choice, which for this, I'm just using this to show you that you can do it with really any wood as long as you've got clear grain. I've done it in walnut, cherry, and maple, I believe, which this one's in maple. You are also going to need a fine tooth saw, whether it's a Western or a Japanese. I would prefer using a fine tooth Japanese saw, and somehow in this really tough white oak over here, I have broke teeth off here, but should still work fine. So that's the saw I'm going to use for the Kumiko. So next step, we're going to be cutting the Kumiko strips, and we're going to do that on the bandsaw. So I'll see you over at the bandsaw, and we'll get that done. Also, I forgot to mention, a lot of this information comes from Desmond King's book on shoji and Kumiko patterns. I don't know exactly where I put the book. I was going to show you guys, but I think between the moving shops, I either forgot it or lost it, which is kind of scary because I really like the book, and I've read it probably 4 times now. I would highly recommend it. It goes into a lot more detail on these jigs and everything you need to know about how to make these Kumiko patterns. I'm just showing you kind of the way that I like to do it, my workflow and stuff like that, and giving you some information in case you don't want to buy the book. But I would highly recommend that you buy the book. It's super beneficial. Okay guys, next thing you want to do is set your digital calipers to 6.4 millimeters or whatever width Kumiko that you want. In my case, it's 6.4 millimeters, which is, as you can see, this wide. But we're not using this part or this part. We're actually going to be using this little end extension here on the bandsaw. So let's jump over here to the bandsaw. I'm going to show you how I set that up to get a pretty accurate width on the bandsaw. Okay guys, once you have 6.4 millimeters set on your digital calipers, what we're going to do is we're going to rest this part right here on the blade, and we're going to scoot that the fence up, and we're going to get about 2 millimeters from the end of the extension on your digital calipers. So just like that. And then I'm going to make sure my fence is square. And it is not, of course. I'm using a crappy bandsaw, so I guess that's what I get. So now my fence is square. I'm going to lock that down. And I'm about 2 millimeters away, about 1.5 millimeters away from the end here, so that way we can go over to the thickness planer, or we can go over to the hand plane method, which I'm not going to show in this video, and we're going to get those exactly down to 6.4 millimeters, and we're going to use the calipers to do that. And so now I'm just going to rip these strips down off camera, and we're going to go over to the thickness planer, and I'm going to show you how to do that from there. So be back. So I've cut 4 strips here. I've also hand planed them with my Japanese plane on one side to get it square. I've cut 4 pieces, and I realized they're really wide, and I can actually get 2 pieces out of one of these, so I'm actually going to rip this about in half. So I'm going to get my digital calipers again. I'm going to get 14 millimeters. I'm going to set the fence. I'm going to rip all these pieces down, and then we'll go to the thickness planer, and I'll show you what to do from there. You can see I have all the strips here in the rough. As you can see, some are bigger than the others, and that's because they weren't cut exactly in half, because they were a little over double 14 millimeters. So first things first, we want to get these down to 14 millimeters, and then we will come back and we will get these down to 14 millimeters. I've cut a little extra. You don't need this many, but it's always good to cut extra because you never know what could happen. So yeah, all we're going to do is we're going to run these to the thickness planer, and we're going to come back with our calipers until we're exactly at 14 millimeters. It's really that simple. So we'll just grab these like this, and we will put the calipers on these, and we will see that these are at around 20.4 mil. So we're gonna have a little bit to remove on those, and these should be around, I think 15, 16. So right at 16. So we just got a little bit to remove on those to get those down to 14 millimeters, and I will do that, and I will be right back. So I'm pretty close. Being within 0.1 of a millimeter is pretty good, or I usually try to get around 0.08, which is about half the thickness of a piece of paper. So I believe I'm pretty happy with that. So all I'm gonna do now is I'm just gonna flip these over just like this. And we're gonna get this down to 6.4 millimeters, and then we will be done with the Kumiko pieces and we can move on to the next step. So I'm gonna do this really quick. This is what your pieces should look like in the end. I like to do one last check to see what I've got here. About 0.1 mil from that one. I'm about 0.6 mil. So, I don't know about you, but that's pretty close to being perfect, and I'm thoroughly happy with that. And as you can see, if you just take a look at these pieces of pine, they actually look really good. I mean, it is construction pine, but you can get some really good results as long as you pick the right grain and you don't have any knots or anything. And that is some good looking Kumiko pieces that I would not be upset with using in a project. So next step is to break out this jig right here, and set all those Kumiko pieces aside. And the next thing is to determine how wide you want these squares. So I'm gonna go off camera. I'm gonna kind of do a little bit of thinking on how big I want these, because I'm probably gonna put this in my house. So I'll come back and I'll tell you my plan, and then we'll get to using this jig. And yeah. Guys, I've got a different microphone situation now, so hopefully you guys can hear me a whole lot better. So I've decided that I want the pitch for my Kumiko, which the pitch is going to be from here to here. I've decided that's going to be 100 mil. That would be about this wide, and that's actually a pretty big Kumiko pattern, but it's going to be wall art in my house, so I kind of wanted it to be a little bit bigger. So that's what I've decided on, and that's what we're going to go with. I accidentally turned my microphone off here, but I will just narrate this, and everything should be good. So obviously the Kumiko pattern will have 3 horizontal Kumiko pieces and 3 vertical. So we're going to have 6 in the jig, and we're just going to scoot that all up, and we're going to screw it down, and those pieces should not move anywhere. Preferably for these little back and front pieces, you want to use hardwood, because these small pieces kind of split out when you put the screws in, even if you don't use much pressure. So using a piece of hardwood would be probably a lot better. So I'm going to use 15 millimeter extensions on the outside of the Kumiko. That's 15 mil. I also forgot to mention that you need a really accurate square for this. And we're just going to mark across all 6 pieces. Most important part, you want to put a scrap piece of Kumiko up against your square, and you want to move it over until you cannot see the first line that you made, and then you want to mark a line there. So that will represent the half flap, and the closer you can get this to perfect, the better the fitment will be in the end. So you might want to play with this on some really scrap pieces and see where you like the fitment. It's kind of a trial and error thing until you find what's right. So from that second line that we made, I'm actually going to mark 70 mil, and that should be my pitch for the Kumiko. So we're just going to draw our line, and we are going to do the same thing with the Kumiko piece, and then we're just going to duplicate this one more time, and that should be the joinery laid out and done. Alrighty, so of course I didn't turn my microphone on. But all we've done here is sawed down to the back piece and the front piece, and now all we got to do is take a 3mm chisel. I think a 6mm will actually fit in here perfect, but I like to use the 3. I find it a little bit easier. We're just going to pry it out just like this. Once you get the first one out, it's a little bit easier because you have a little guide to move across. I like to get the bulk of the waste out kind of carefully, and then I'll come back through and really get all of it out. You can also clamp this jig to your bench, but I didn't in this case. Normally I don't need to. Make sure you get all the way down to the bottom. And that looks good to me. I'm gonna do the same thing on these two, and I will get back with you guys. All right, so once you have cut those down, you should be left with a bunch of pieces that kind of look like this. And also saved all the offcuts because those are going to be made, or those are going to be used for the actual pattern pieces. So now it's time to assemble this. I'm not going to do any glue right now. So let's see how we did. So that fit in pretty snug. I do finger pressure because I know I'm pretty confident with this because I've done it a few times, and if you're doing this for the first time, use like a hard block and a hammer to seat them. You'll have a lot less chance of breaking these end pieces off and snapping the middle or something. So actually right now that's a little tight, so I'm actually gonna do that. So just like that. And the bottom of my workbench isn't flat at all, so this makes it a little bit more difficult. I might get me a flat piece of wood here in a second to set this on. So that is fitting really tight right there. So just seat that. Seat that one. And that's pretty much it right there. Okay, so next thing that we're going to do is we're going to break out the 45-degree jig, and I'm just going to get a rough line of how long this needs to be. So I'm going to say about right there. So all I'm going to do is put this in the jig. I like to do this just because, and I will cut this off at roughly 45. Well, I can get things out of my way here. And I will look and make sure that is longer than I need, which it is, so that's good. And that's going to be the first piece. So I need to cut 4 more just like that. Okay, so I've set these in here, and I need to bump this stop block up a little bit. And now I'm just going to start shaving this down. Once you get this down to where the jig stops it, you're going to flip these pieces over, and that way this backstop will actually make sure that the point is exactly in the middle, if that makes any sense. So we're going to do that on this side, and we're going to do that on this side, and then we are going to slowly take shavings off until we get them fit right in here. So it's really as simple as that. So I'm not going to show any more of the process. I kind of just wanted to show you how I have these set in here. I have them, they all fit perfect, as you can see. It's actually hard to get them out of there because they're so perfectly fit in there. But I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I will get back to you whenever I have these fit in here. Alright, so of course I forgot to turn on my microphone again. This tutorial is kind of everywhere, and I apologize for that. I've also forgot to record a couple things, but hopefully you guys have learned something so far. But anyway, I've fit these in here, and they fit kind of good. I'd preferred them to be a little bit tighter, but for the sake of this tutorial, those look perfectly fine. And now we will get to cutting the hinge pieces. So when marking your hinge pieces, you need to be a little bit more than half, so leave yourself some room to trim down, and you should be fine. It's kind of easy to trim these a little bit short, and they won't be long enough, so just make sure you leave yourself some room. So the next step in making the pattern is to make these hinge pieces, and these hinge pieces are actually the most complicated part of the pattern. So I kind of did a few ahead so I could kind of explain it. So as you can see, we went to the 67.5 degree jig, and I made the angle, but I only did it 1/3 of the way on this side. Same with this piece. So that way whenever we put this together, the small part of the 1/3 goes on the inside towards here on the longer piece, just like this. So it fits together just like that. Now I'm back to the 22.5 degree jig, and I'm just trimming to fit, and a little technique that I use to hold these pieces down, so if you don't have to use your fingers first of all, and also these pieces, since you're doing such a crazy angle, they tend to want to lift up like that. So I just put a scrap piece of Kumiko right here that fits in this gap, and I'll just clamp it down, and that clamps all these down perfect. I don't have to worry about anything. I don't have to worry about them moving, and I just trim them just like this. Alright guys, once you have all those cut, what you're going to do is we're going to take a rough measurement, preferably oversized by a little bit, and we're just going to make a mark, and we're going to cut on that line, and we're just going to cut 2, 4, 6, 8 pieces, and those are all 45 degrees on both sides, the same way we did the middle piece, and then the pattern will be done. So I'm going to do that really quick. Alrighty guys, I have finished putting in the final pieces, the small pieces here, and it turns out I put these long pieces in here the wrong way. I don't know why I did it, but I noticed it when I was putting in the final pieces. They're supposed to go and make an X, so that way the pattern comes out the way it should. But yeah, so that completes the pattern. I have a little bit of gaps right here and right here. I don't know if you guys can see that, but the reason for it is because these hinge pieces were a little bit too long, and it's kind of forcing it one way or the other. But I'm not too worried about that. I think it turned out okay, and it turned out definitely good enough for this tutorial. And I hope you guys learned something, and if you did, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and I will definitely be seeing you in the next one.